Well, so we are already recording, and welcome to the Ordinance Review Committee on March 20th at 9 a.m. We've got Councilors Leo Getty, Councilor Care, Demerit, and myself, Councilor Airway, and Shirley Crosby, clerk. So, what we've got for today's schedule is to look at the general assistance materials that Shirley shared with us, and discuss sort of the status of the business licensing issues that Shirley raised with us last time, and also get a sense for the status of or the work that it might take to be digging into Chapter 30 around solid waste issues. But why don't we start with GA? And Shirley, do you want to sort of?
Yes, so the last time that we were here, I had given everyone the draft copy of what we were proposing. And after the committee had reflected and said that they'd like me to move forward, I reached out to the Department of DHHS and had the actual auditor review this policy and to think about how we were looking to approach the concern they had raised during the last audit. And they said that they were 100% on board. They thought it would meet the requirement. They did agree that we should repeal and remove the entire ordinance on the books right now and just go with this and then insert in each year. So every fall you have to do this. It's just part of normal business, right? As all the other municipalities in the state. So the only thing that wouldn't change is this opening introduction, but the material behind it, which is the MMA ordinance based on statute that changes every legislative session, that would get changed. It would just be an automatic housekeeping. So they did recommend though that I have an attorney take a look at it just because they don't like to give legal advice. So on Monday, I had probably a 40-minute conversation with one of the MMA legal attorneys. They reviewed everything. They said that they agreed that this should be how we proceed. They did not see anything initially in this that caused any concern at all. They thought it was a good overview. And they are supposed to be offering me a legal written opinion. That has not come yet. She was gonna try to hit this meeting and have it completed, but I had not received it as of this morning. So at this juncture, I would say to the committee, this is like any other standard thing that we would run up the chain. We'd put it through public hearing. It would have, you know, a review by the council, and then the council could make their decision if they would like to proceed with the ordinance change.
Great. Are there any questions from?
So we'll get some sort of review from the attorney prior, but we can move ahead and call a public hearing. We can kind of review that. We don't have to wait around another month to do it, right? We'll get it and we'll bring it into the. We're gonna get rid of a reputation for striking ordinances. Now this will be the second one we've eliminated. That's good work for government though. You know, if you're doing it.
Yeah. And I will tell you that both DHHS and MMA's attorney said to me, unclear or unsure how this has ever gotten by for this number of years. It seems like sometime since 1996, somebody should have said, hey, wait a minute, we're approving an entire ordinance that is not the ordinance in the manual. Like, and so they just were really surprised.
Since when? How long? 1996?
It was 94, 96, I believe, was the last time that work had been done. I mean, we were covered because every fall we were making the action and applying the rules.
Yeah.
But where this gets technically difficult or challenging is if we go to a fair hearing because somebody is challenging a determination. Because then we're in conflict.
Yeah.
Which ordinance do we follow?
Yeah. I like this kind of example in terms of, we do a lot of things that I think, we spend quite a bit of council time on fun things, you know, we were here the other night talking about Orono Festival Days and,
Mhm.
several of us were leaders here, and, but this is the grind out, grown up governing that we do too, and,
Right.
we don't get a room full of people to talk about it, but I think it's important, so.
Yeah. So that is the GA project. And the other project you asked me to speak about was the business licensing. And what I can update you on that is I have been spending the time since we last met, going through the entire ordinance manual cover to cover and trying to find or pull out, extract any reference to any type of business licensing. Because if we're gonna do this, we might as well do it right. What I have found is business licensing is sprinkled throughout the entire book. There's not, yes, we have a section that talks about alcohol licensing. And we have a section that talks about taxi cabs and vehicles for hire. And we have a small section that talks about victulars. But what we don't have is like a uniformity of where to find these things or a good, quick cross-reference tool. So I've talked to the initial stakeholders, which would be our code enforcement officer, our public safety personnel, our police department, and then of course, economic development director. And we've all agreed that we need to have a sit down around the table and we need to talk about how we're currently practicing, what is the best approach, and then get something on paper that we can bring back to this committee and then look at how do we want to move forward.
Could you speak a little bit again to why this particular is sort of a higher priority in your review on the list of all these ordinance reviews that the committee's charged with?
Okay, so the reason I view this as being a priority is we promote ourselves or we advertise ourselves as being somewhat friendly business, economic development. We want to grow Orono. And right now, we do have policies and we do have applications and mechanisms in place, but we are still working on a system or a model that I believe was a good 10 or 15 years out, meaning historic, right? We've kept up with the times, but there have been gaps in that where there are some types of business in town or some types of things that we don't regulate that we should be. And we have some things that maybe we're regulating that the state has completely changed how they do business. We're still set up on a paper system. However, the majority of the state agencies have gone to electronic systems. The best example I can give to you is our current liquor licensing. We are still set up that we would be treating it like a paper system where somebody gets an application, fills it out, brings it in, and then we go through all of our mechanics. However, back in the fall of 24, the state, Bablo, decided, Bureau of Liquor and Alcohol decided they were done with that system. They've now transitioned to 100% electronic. So at a council meeting, it still looks the same because we, are handling it still the same because that's how our ordinance and our practice is. But on the backside, what you all don't know is that I'm electronically doing what I have to do to ensure that these liquor establishments are getting the proper licensing. So because we've had so many significant changes and we've identified that there are gaps in our business licensing permitting, I feel that it's important as we transition and move forward for the purpose of economic development and infrastructure stability that we take a look at these things. The best two examples I can point to right now is in your ordinance manual. It talks about vehicles for hire and it talks about taxi cabs. When have we ever permitted, when have we ever asked those questions or licensed them? But it's in our ordinance that is something that we have on the books. And as we see more Ubers and we see more courier services and we tie up Mill Street while they are pulling off in the middle of the road to run in and pick up their takeout, at some point, we could get dinged, because if there is an issue, an accident, or if there is some type of a violation, they're gonna point back to us and say, but you have an ordinance that you don't follow. So that's kind of one of those examples I give. The other example that I would give is that under the state law and under licensing, they recommend that you have a policy or you have an ordinance around innkeepers, tavern holders, bed and breakfasts, hotels, motels. We do not technically right now, I believe that I found, address that in our ordinance manual. The state says we should address it, but we don't currently. And when I sat down with public safety and had this conversation with them in code, what they said was, well, we do inspect them and we do get in there and look and we make sure that they're safe because we do it through the liquor licensing and the victulars process. Well, now we have Hotel Ursa. We've had some changes over here at what used to be the Black Bear Inn. They've changed some names around, but regardless, they are now changing how they service their hotel guests. They are not necessarily getting the same licensing that they once were. So when I sit with the public safety folks and the code folks, I say to them, so if they're not taking out a victualer's license and they're not taking out a liquor license because now they're doing off catering permits, which are a whole different beast of a dragon, then when are you getting in to inspect those buildings? It's not an annual process now because we don't have necessarily a reason to go in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And they probably go in for other things that I don't know about. Right now, I'm focused on the business licensing. So those are the examples I point to as to why I think that this is of a higher priority.
Thank you for walking us through that.
Yep.
Thanks.
Both for us and for.
Yeah, I would want us to be cautious about overregulation, not a fan of overregulation. The Uber example is a good one in that, yeah, I'm seeing that where they're parked there. That said, that's not a lot, I mean, if it's an Uber from somewhere else.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter, but so that's a traffic.
It is.
That's
And
not a, and so I don't
Yep.
see the liability there of us not following a policy. It is,
Mhm.
you're double parked and your parking shouldn't be.
I-
That's what caused the issue. I don't know where it goes in the court and
Right.
all that, but.
yeah,
So I don't think we try to like hamstring stuff via this licensing vehicle.
no,
I think Ursa's a good example. I do know I think, if you have either 3 units or 4 units, which presumably a hotel could fall under, but it probably doesn't, to your point. They have by every 3 years, they have to come through, is how they do it now, so.
yeah. May I add one
Please.
more piece?
Please.
So one other piece I do want to add, and to speak to your point, Leo, is in speaking with the stakeholders, meaning the other departments that this affects, the one message that I heard loud and clear is they do not want to overregulate either because resources are spread thin, and the more that we try to manage, the more that people have to leave the office and get out and inspect and do all of those things. But having said that, there is a trend across the state as municipalities have gotten further strapped with budgets and staffing to look at not an annual licensing model, meaning that you may license every other year for certain types of business licensing. And the best example I can give to you is a lot of municipalities on their junkyards have gone to a 3-year or a 5-year renewal. So as long as that person has not had any violation and is compliant and has an established good standing with the municipality, they can opt in for a 3-year renewal or a 5-year renewal. And so what you would do is you do your paperwork, you would charge the rate that we typically charge on an annual basis times however many years that you're going to grant that. And then the only thing that they have to do is allow their business to be inspected once a year to make sure that they're remaining compliant. But in doing that, what it does is it helps the municipality conserve resources and be more efficient in how they're managing their time at the council meetings, because you're not seeing business licensing annually or every month. You are setting up a very good calendar, and people are rotating through that calendar, provided that everyone's playing by the rules.
That if you can get through a public hearing in 35 seconds, it's kind of a sign, well, maybe we didn't need to do it.
Right, and we kind of did something like that for housekeeping when we looked at public hearings.
Yeah,
And why are we having public hearings and paying the newspaper $300 and $400 a month to have public hearings for businesses that have never had a violation?
I think that makes a lot of sense, and you look at if you just type the word business into the search, I like the search function and the code platform we use. If you type the word business in, it pops 16 different chapters up. of
Yeah.
places where there's a lot of, you could be like, all right, I got everything I need to know, I know everything I need to know, because I've looked through these 15 chapters, and there's one place where you didn't see it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, that's where municipalities fall into the loopholes.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're trying, it's more about good housekeeping.
Yep.
And let's examine our process, and can it be improved on and be more efficient?
It's beautiful.
Well, this sounds like a worthwhile project. I guess what's the next step? For us, I assume you'll be bringing more specific materials for us to be looking at.
Yeah, my immediate next steps would be if I can pull all the information out of the ordinance manual, try to get it somewhat compiled, pull the team together, all the stakeholders, and us sit around the table and use the approach of how are we currently conducting ourselves and what works and what doesn't, and how can we be more efficient? Then we can get a framework to bring back as a preliminary look for the committee.
And I wonder if, I know, as you said, there's so many different chapters in the ordinances that stuff's relevant, and then this could easily get very, like an octopus, tentacles everywhere, but.
Yes.
But is part of the hope that we might consolidate things into one place in
Yes.
the ordinances? So is there a thinking yet? I mean, I know you have to have this discussion with everybody. Any first intuitions about where things might fit?
The bulk of what I've been able to pull out thus far has lived under the alcohol licensing section and the public safety section. Code does share some of this, so I think that organically will happen as we brainstorm.
Okay.
But in researching other communities, a lot of other communities have their own chapter of business licensing or permitting. And they treat it as its own individual standalone. And yes, you do have cross-referencing of other sections of code because so many different departments have a part in that. But they actually have a chapter that they can point to. And if you look at the state regulation model and you look at the way the state statutes are set up, they actually have an entire book that is nothing more than business licensing and permitting. And it's broken out. And so if we are to move in the direction I think we could go, I would like to use that as our framework. And then look at trying to consolidate some of this.
And to be clear, I know we've been doing well, between our recent work on the personnel policy handbook and then also, I think the direction we're going with this general assistance stuff. The idea is not that we're gonna be taking things out of ordinance again, and creating another non-ordinance book.
No,
Okay, great.
no, this is going to be more comprehensive, but working from the framework that we have.
But just to clarify, my assumption would be all these, where this is dispersed, you would take it out of there, is that not?
I think, well, sorry, Shelley, you can
No.
respond.
What I would see happening is you would be removing it from that section, but you would be relocating it to its own chapter. So you're technically not striking it or repealing it.
Or you might be, if it's something old that's.
Exactly, like we may decide, for example, we may decide, and we may be guided by public safety, that the concerns we have around vehicles for hire and public taxi cabs, that we don't ever want to regulate those. We don't want to take on that responsibility or liability. We don't have the resources to do it. And so if that is the case, then that could be one that the committee says, hey, we want to completely strike this. This is a traffic issue. This is a public safety issue, and that needs to be handled by enforcement.
And maybe I misunderstood your question, but I mean, I don't think we leave these scatterings of stuff around in different parts of policies. I mean, and that does seem like the cleanest way. So anything business-wise, it has its own chapter or a policy.
Yeah.
Or group. Take that stuff back in and decide what's keepable. It's gonna be removed one way or another from those locations, and end up in here. Is that what you were thinking too?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to, I'm sensitive to the fact that, well, it is, I think it makes a lot of sense for the movement that we made with the policy handbook. It makes a lot of sense to be going this direction with the massive sort of changes that are, and annual changes that are ongoing with general assistance at the state level that we have to comply with. Both of these things make sense to be locating the specifics somewhere else with some clear guidelines, and some general details in the ordinance about it. But I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that, well, this is not at all what I take to be your intention or anybody on staff's intention, to make sure that we are not sort of legislating ourselves out of our own sort of position of jurisdiction over.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a more general concern that's not necessarily applicable to what you're
Is
raising.
that based on my comment of not overregulating? Because
No,
I mean, I don't
it's
think,
not.
I don't think anything disappears. If it does disappear, it's documented why it disappeared. And again, it's just everything's consolidated, and then you do the work that needs to be done to decide, change, add.
It's more just that, I mean, while these, like the policy handbook, people can access it, or general assistance, people can access that if they look for it. Having things in ordinance is generally, I mean, it's one place for people to go to see what are the ordinances, what are the rules that we as a community are abiding by together. So I mean, these make sense. They refer to where you can go for more information. I just, I hesitate to outsource everything, which is not at all what we're really doing here. I'm not trying to say that that's what's happening. It's more just a more general concern about making sure that that's not a sort of the solution for everything. And I wanted to get clear that that's not what we were thinking about here. What you just described, Leo, what you described, Shelley, it's just making sure we're reading all this and putting it in one spot. I mean, I'm already thinking like, without, better than I where the stuff can go, but I mean, just seeing like chapter 4 is just alcoholic beverages, maybe that could be
Right, expanded.
business licensing, and then alcoholic beverages is like a subcategory.
Yep.
What do you think about? That makes sense to me. What both of you just shared. What do you think about when we do this work and you're gonna bring the staff together? At what point, like we talk about the cars for hire that are picking up food. I've been talking to Rita when I was, and it's in and out, people picking up bags, and I think as we have this conversation about safety, we also have to have a conversation about accommodation, because we want businesses in our downtown where, parking is tricky and things like, it's not easy in, easy out like it is at like a Roma Joe's or something. I think we need to think about what they need in terms of access to those drivers, because that's gotta be a significant portion of the revenue, given what I see.
Maybe there is a
Couple spots, just for.
exactly,
Yeah.
so I was,
You got 5 minutes and you can't park there, nobody else can park in these spots, but then you can't park in the street, you can't double park in the street. So
Yeah.
it's something.
So I guess what I would say to that is I see the committee coming together and looking at this more from a policy practice. So our job is to consolidate, build a framework. I come back to the committee and I say to the committee, We believe that we can bring these together. This is how we can frame it. We are at the point now of the work that we need to have good dialogue with the council on what is the direction that you want us to go. So perhaps at that point, I bring the framework. This committee then makes the decision, is this worthy of like a council workshop or a discussion? Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to assume that we know what anybody wants.
Yeah.
Put all the work into an ordinance draft. Have a public hearing and have it get ripped to shreds. What we want to do is we want to take our time and we want to develop something so that on that first read through at that public hearing, it seems like it makes the best sense for Orono. So I would think, it's gonna be a communication thing with me communicating back to this committee, and then this committee saying at what point you feel that this warrants a discussion.
Yeah, I think maybe ideas like what you just raised, Dan, which sounds really appealing to me on first thought, are for us to discuss further when we have something specific
Yeah.
to build around. Maybe like, well, what else do we think might be worth adding in since we're dealing with this section?
Could you share with us what you do pull together that the committee is gonna be looking at, from what you're pulling from the different chapters, that's gonna be, it's gonna drive this discussion? I mean, I'd like to read that as well.
Yeah.
Once you pull it, just to know what
Right.
it is you guys are seeing, just to
Yeah.
understand the process and where it's coming from.
Oh, sure. I can tell you right now, I've already got 5 chapters already downloaded in its original context, prepped so that when I pull the committee together, I mean, and that's just the 5 that I found so far. We'll be looking at those sections.
It's the staff committee, right, not this committee.
Yeah, I just wanna bring everybody to the table so that when I'm ready to do or involve you, it doesn't make sense for you all to sit around the table while we try to figure that we've gotten all the pieces. Yeah.
Order of operations makes sense. We'll look forward to digging into what you bring to us. Is there any other sort of direction or thought that we want to share with Shelley as she gets into that work?
No, but again, before she shares what she's gonna bring to us from the outcome of that meeting, I do.
Yeah, we want to be able to read it so that we have something to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I have, so I'll tell you what we can do. I have a Google Drive folder right now that is my current ordinance work. And I can share that with you. I don't have a problem with you taking a look at it at your convenience. And you can see what I'm pulling and dropping in.
That'd be great.
And then that way you can check in as you feel that you want to check in. And I mean, I just have to get everybody at this point around the table.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah, and if you can give us access, that'd be
And that-
great.
Yeah,
And I don't know, that's also, I think, a hard thing to do, I think, there's so many, and so you, them, whoever else has to prioritize where this is on the
Yeah.
list of priorities that you already have, so.
right.
I know Dan likes to talk about timelines. But I don't wanna impose, I really don't wanna impose anything as far as the timeline goes. I would
Right.
want that to be brought back, you tell us based
Yeah.
on everyone.
We're like Star Trek, we're on like a 5-year journey.
Well, I don't know, that's in question, isn't it?
You know, it is, Council Marks caught us on something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do have a few sort of more general questions about sort of the work of the committee in general, but before we leave this item, I guess, is the plan for next month's meeting for us to potentially have this? I mean, I know we were just saying we don't necessarily want to impose a timeline on, but what do you think the timeline is going to be? Because we do.
So,
That's Rob, not Dan.
yeah,
Yeah.
my goal for next month's meeting was that I was gonna report back, I had met with the committee. These are the sections that we're tackling initially, and get feedback from the committee of where you wanted me to head with this.
Great, okay. And skipping back for a second to the general assistance, what is the sort of next order of operation on this one as well? Because we did sort of go
Yep.
by that a little bit.
So the next order of operation is to get a public hearing scheduled.
Okay. So, can we make sure that this, if it hasn't already been shared with the full council, this draft
Mhm.
ordinance change, make sure
Yeah.
that that's seen by everybody?
Probably what I likely will do, and this might be middle of next week based on staffing, what I may do is do up like a memorandum, which I would like flip, and it basically gives backstory and gives details to go along with this, because
Wonderful.
I would prefer, and I normally will address those to Clint and then the council. And that way, anyone who may look at that will have some backstory before we move forward.
Perfect. Great, thank you.
Do you think it's a presentation, separate presentation, Rob, from you and Shelley, or do you think it's as part of your update to the ordinance committee? Just from,
I think it could go either way.
Okay.
It depends on how,
what's happening with it?
yeah. I don't foresee this being a huge discussion, but then you never know, some people, want this detail, that detail, so. I mean, if it doesn't take that long, maybe it's not that bad an idea to make it a general discussion item,
A presentation.
a presentation item.
And back to like the general, our attempt to be over communicating and transparent, it would be, as we get going in this, or as staff gets going in this, it would be really great to figure out how we let any and all businesses in town know that this is being considered.
Yeah.
It's on agendas, but.
Mhm.
Yeah, oh, I agree, I think it ought to be,
Yeah, I don't know, and again, that's only creating work for people, so I.
And you're talking about the business licensing,
Business licensing, yeah, and, right,
great, yeah,
makes sense to me.
should think about how to get that up there.
I guess that's on council, but let's keep that on council.
Yeah, I think so too.
Great.
Just broad question, what percentage do you think of our policies are likely out of sync? I mean, we've only looked at 3 so far, and or 2, right, 3, and our practices are much different than our policy, and the solid waste, same. I'm just curious if you had to guess at a percentage of any of our policies are out of sync with our practices, 50, 70?
Do you mean policies versus ordinance or practices versus
Practice.
policy versus ordinance?
Practice, whether policy, ordinance versus practice. We're. You know what I mean?
At this juncture, I don't know that I would even wager a guess. I look at ordinance work maybe a little bit different than maybe how our ordinance book is set up. And that's just a different, so I've been trained and I've seen practiced that your ordinance really is kind of like a bylaw or a framework for you to have the authority to impose standard operating procedures, policies, guidelines. And so how I was trained and what I've done in my past work is that ordinance manual is basically the frame, it's the shell. And then the actual mechanics of practice come through additional addendums, exhibits, policies, and they're not as final as an ordinance. And when I look at our municipal ordinance as our municipal ordinance is right now, it seems at times that we try to put a lot of information in that ordinance manual, which technically binds you, because then you're always having to go back to get permission if you even want to change something that is just an administrative policy.
Yeah.
So at this point, Leo, without really having more time to break apart the ordinance manual and apply that, I would be nervous to give you an
Yeah.
estimate.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that, just reading this one, that does seem like one. About like we're naming businesses, perk and all this stuff in here, which did seem kind of strange.
Yeah, and I can tell you that when I did a lot of this type of work for the Maine Department of Education in my past, they wanted the complete school policies reviewed no less than every 3 years. So that meant if you opened up school administrative policy, that district or that SAD, RSU, every single policy that they operated under had been reviewed or touched within the last 3 years.
Mhm.
So and that's a whole different beast, and I get that. But when I look at an ordinance manual and I open up to a chapter or a section, and it was last reviewed in 1996, that causes concern for me. So I think that we have a direction to do some good work.
Well, I appreciate you raising that larger question. I appreciate you offering your expertise and thinking about all of that. We do have one other explicit item that we put on the agenda, and I want to be sensitive to the fact that we also
Get a jet in 10, 12 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, I have 2 questions that I want to ask, but before I do, I guess maybe let's hear updates, if any, on the solid waste question. On chapter 30. Just like, last time we discussed this, I believe you said, depending on capacity of your time, that you might go talk to staff about what going through chapter 30 might look like.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have had some preliminary discussions with different stakeholders, departments. And I myself did go through the entire solid waste, and I did it through the lens of grammar, where policy might be questionable, where we would need to make changes. I too, Leo, picked right up on the fiber right and the perk and some of this.
I just Googled perk.
And I was like, oh, and I've started my process of discovery where I start downloading different municipal ordinances from around the state, comparable in size and practice, so that I can look and see, are we hitting the target or are we way off? And where I can tell you that we're at right now is staff is willing to have the conversation if that is the direction that we're going on. But if we are gonna go down there, I would need to invite folks to the table. There is going to be some financial review that would need to take place, right? Because if we're going to look at an ordinance that could technically change current contract practice for fees, then that's gonna be a whole nother sidebar to the actual work. The group is willing and ready to work, but we just need a direction of how in-depth do we want to be and what are we committed to doing?
yeah, I know we've discussed, it seems like there's been some consensus so far in council that if we open up a chapter that we want to really do it thoroughly.
Mhm.
But I want to entertain the notion that, and I know this goes counter to some people who are like Councilor Marks, who I think of that thing I just said as a fairly strong opinion, which I respect in general, and I agree with it. But I wonder if, because there's a more specific concern that brought up this, if there's a way to address, because this isn't, sorry, I'm interrupting myself a bunch. Let me start over. Because there was a specific concern within chapter 30 that was raised that brought this to this committee's attention, and that this is otherwise a rather low priority for staff, if this might be an exception to our general consensus that we want to review the whole chapter when we dig into these things. If we might address the specific question that Leo raised, but not tie up a lot of staff and council resource digging completely into this chapter. I don't know if that sounds reasonable to you, Kelly. I mean, Shelley. Sorry, I said Kenny and Shelley.
Yep,
Yeah.
it's all good. Yeah, I mean, that is something that we can do. I think at the crux of this is going to be doing some analysis.
Okay.
To see what the financial ramifications may be or what the impact could be, because that also could drive, depending on where we are with current contracts and current agreements, that could change how you want to move forward.
There is commercial hauler licensing.
Yeah,
That's in here too.
we do. We have,
So, they have to get a license with us?
yeah, I actually have one that has to get a license with us.
But I mean, Casella has to get a license to Orono to pick up trash.
Well, they're our vendor.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, the solid waste that I'm referring to is something that has to do more with, like hazardous materials / if they're bringing or transporting through Orono, different types of commercial waste. And that is something that they renew in June with me,
Okay.
but we only have one.
This looks to me like it's talking about who's picking up our trash too.
Yeah, like, so it feels like anybody, if Gregory's
Mhm.
disposal service or, you know,
Mhm.
Brian's, we haul your garbage, do they have to get, I mean, if.
So we do have a different type of fee structure downstairs. For commercial haul, like if they're coming in and they need a pass to go up to the landfill, they are paying a different rate and that's being treated differently than residential.
Yeah, this is just about the hauling of it.
Yeah.
Commercial hauler license, meaning, you know, you gotta tell us what your truck is, and this to me would apply to Casella, which I was assuming we wouldn't be doing. That's what I was also.
I can tell you that my office is not, that is not one that I have on file. And
Makes
I-
sense.
I would assume, or I can't speak for the logic behind this, but if they're our vendor that we're contracting with, that may be why we did not require it, but I was not privy to those conversations back when this happened.
But this talks about credit for tonnage and all this stuff too, which again, and I don't really
Right.
care about this, other than the fact that it looks completely outdated. Talks about fiberite coming online in 2018, never happened. Which,
Yeah,
So
this kind
now-
of stuff shouldn't be
Yeah,
yeah,
ordained in ordinance.
right, but I mean, maybe we have this, this is too brief a discussion, but I mean, my point to the usage of bins is if it's four, it's four, and that's where we're at currently in practice. This says 4 units in here, but that was at a time when people just hauled stuff out to the thing. It does say people, you got till 11 o'clock the next morning or something to get your trash, so that's in here and could be reminded already, so that's good news. But I mean, I'm not, I think a discussion of, because I do remember when the bins came out, they're big bins, I remember seeing 4 and 4, 8 bins. We make that, I mean, I think everything's would be on the table to discuss this, and it might just, whether it even goes down, I don't know.
I think because we've got limited time here, why don't we put a pin in this, let's make sure this is an agenda item for next time, and we'll discuss whether or not we might be able to address that specific question, because that's really why this is on our calendar. Or on our agenda. I'm not sure that I have an appetite, and maybe there's a difference for digging more into the full chapter 30. Maybe that's part of the discussion we have next time. Let's make sure that that's on the agenda.
Okay.
As far as, I had 2 other questions that I had. One was a quick one. I did share out this ordinance prep chart document that you shared with us with the rest of the council. They weren't able to access it. If we could make sure that there's at least viewing access for all councilors, that would be really helpful. And then I think one other thing we should put on our calendar or on our agenda for next time is a more meta discussion of the general calendar. As Councilor Marks raised, is it a 4-year schedule, 5-year schedule, and what is the schedule? I think that can be heavily informed by the priorities listed by staff. Maybe we take this document, the ordinance prep chart that you shared with us, Shelley, and put it in order
Yep.
the priorities. Cause right now it's, listed in terms of the order of chapters, which makes a lot of sense too.
Mhm.
And maybe I can take some time to go through, create a different proposed, at least initial thing for us to look at, critique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. I like the idea of providing council with, if we have to change our charge to 5 years instead of 4, let's do that. I like the idea of providing council with kind of what we currently think, and with the understanding that, we're not locking ourselves into, okay, on our April 2029 meeting, we're gonna do, but, and I wanna be, and if people have suggestions, what they think. I mean, I'm happy to listen, but if you wanna be on the committee, get yourself appointed to the committee, and you know what I mean, and if not, we'll do our work and we'll report, we'll take advice, but.
yeah. No, I think that's right, and, I don't take Councilor Marks' suggestions or thoughts as interference with the work of the
No, I
committee.
don't either.
And I know that's not what you were saying out there. But, I think that's a good example of, hey, we did have a different charge here. Let's make sure that we're either adjusting that charge to be in compliance with what council has asked us to do, or well, you know what I'm saying.
I do know what you're saying.
So, for next time, then our discussion is gonna be, I think, at least general assistance is now going to full council
Mhm.
for review. The business licensing, you're gonna keep working on that, come back with more information for us when you've met with that group.
Yep.
Of staff, you'll let us know the things that we should be looking at for our homework, be prepared for that for next time. So that'll be on our agenda for next time, as well as talking specifics of chapter 30 and talking about our more general calendar and priorities.
Sure, that's a good meeting,
Anything else for anybody?
this is a good meeting. Nicely done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. All right, that calls to close the ordinance review committee on March 20th. 9:47. Thank you.
There.
Talk myself in circles.
No.
I
I
need some
there's a
coffee.
lot.
Yeah.
And everything is contingent on something else happening. So it's easy to lose your place.
You're a very thoughtful man, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Jen.
And there's something to be said for you kind of running the meeting and having your own thought, participating in the meeting. And
Dan's homed it, he's homed it.
no. Looking down the left side of the table and looking back at me,
Everything goes smoothly.
Thanks, have a good day.
Take it easy, guys.